On this episode of bit my tongue.
Oh, ouch. I hate it when I do that.
On this episode of Take This Down, I sit down with Miss Deah Berry Mitchell, author, food critic, historian, and we have an interesting conversation that's not only touching to me, but also touches my belly. Oh. So you're not going to want to miss this episode. You're going to want to take this down. Well, Deah, thank you for joining me on Take This Down. It's truly an honor to have you here today to have this conversation.
Thank you.
My mouth is already watering because I know we're going to be talking about food, I hope, and it's already
not today. Just kidding.
So, I always like to start off by telling my guests why I invited them on. You and I connected through Fort Worth many years ago. We won't say how long or things like that. But, are you familiar with the Dos Equis commercial, The Most Interested Man in the World?
I am.
You, to me, are the most interesting woman in the world for the different
you.
Adventures, from your travels to, the tours and historian, but how you preserve culture.
Thank you.
And it's just something I just wanted to have the conversation with, to what inspired your passion and so that's why you're here today.
That's very kind.
I want my audience to know she didn't come with food, which is kind of disheartening, but nevertheless, we're going to continue with the show.
I took the train over here, so I didn't want to be getting jumped on the train, bringing food,
I'm teasing. So, let's kind of get into it. So who is Deah Berry Mitchell at her core?
Well, first, I have to say thank you again for having me. I'm very honored. This coming from the Legend in the Making Award. So I'm like, I can't say no to this guy. But no, I'm really excited to be here. But who am I? Deah is a lover of all things culture. I know for the most part, I speak often in the communities about Black culture, but I travel a lot internationally and domestically, and I love any sort of culture. So I just love researching and finding out things as best as I can about different cultures, different cities and communities. I love people.
You talk a lot about, you're enjoying culture, all culture, but you're from Sherman, Texas.
I'm from Sherman. You did your research.
And so I hope it
Wait
makes
a minute.
sense.
Wait a minute. Hold up. Yeah.
So talk about, growing up in Sherman, Texas.
Well, you raise a very valid point. So growing up in Sherman, I do a lot of public speaking. And when I'm giving these presentations to people, I often go back and I tell them about how I got my start. And there's one PowerPoint slide that I reserved to kind of encapsulate my background. And that photo that I show on that slide is one of the museum that's in Sherman and also the public library. So I spent a great deal of my youth at both. And I often joke that when I grew up with my mother and my grandmother primarily, and I often joke that when she would take me to the museums at Sherman, we had one museum and we usually had like 3 rotating exhibits. Nothing changed. So I was seeing the same stuff over and over and over again. But it still helped me kind of develop my love for history and my passion for that, just seeing my mother and how much she was devoted very deeply to familial history and things of that nature. So that's where I got that kind of curiosity to learn more and to research from. I like to think anyway.
Gotcha. And so you said you grew up with your mom and your grandmother. What did they instill in you?
So I had a very, pretty much probably a hybrid. I would say probably more of a hybrid kind of background, not all the way traditional, but somewhat contemporary. So my grandmother is from East Texas. She's from Crockett, Texas.
Very familiar.
Very familiar? Okay.
All my family's in Tyler.
Oh, that's okay. Great. So I would spend summers in Crockett with my grandmother's side of the family. And she raised me admiring all things like country, whether it be food or just anything like that. Making everything from scratch, homemade, that was her. Whereas my mother, back in the day, I like to think she was really ahead of her time. So when I was little, and I won't say how old I am right now, but when I was little,
21.
Yeah, I'm 22 and a half. But when I was a little girl, my mom was so ahead of her time. She would do things like ask me to create the menu of what I wanted to eat. So she would really give me the agency at a very young age to draw, craft up whatever I wanted to eat for the day, help her design the menus for the week. And then occasionally we would have Italian themed nights and she would do all things Italian. And so I kind of had a combination of those two, which led towards my passions today.
Gotcha. So you knew very early on exactly what you wanted to do, how you was going to get there, the path you was going to take.
Absolutely not. Yeah. I knew that I loved to eat and I loved food, but most people are surprised to hear this. I did not grow up cooking. Mm-hmm. I didn't know how to cook. Like I would burn rice. I was horrible.
I mean, cooking rice is kind of hard.
It is kind of hard, right? But I was not necessarily a good cook, and it wasn't because I was not able to. It's because I didn't have the opportunity. My grandmother cooked all the time. My cousins had restaurants in Sherman. I worked for them. So there was really not an opportunity for me to kind of get those sea legs, so to speak. But it wasn't until I moved to Houston and my roommate at the time, Jackie, her family is from the Dominican Republic. And she used to cook all the time. And I was so inspired by her love of food and the things that she would create and how different they were than the foods that I had grown up with. Because as you mentioned, coming from Sherman, I won't say that there is no culture. I can appreciate it now. It has its own very niche culture. But I wasn't exposed to a lot of international culture. And so moving to Houston really opened my eyes to that. And my roommate, Jackie, as I mentioned, loved to cook. Her mom was a chef and she started cooking and I kind of started watching her in the kitchen. And that's where I got my start. And then after that, if you want me to jump ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
So after that, I kind of got my love of cooking all the time and experimenting with different recipes and combining and drawing from foods from my past with her foods and kind of co-mingling those in a sense. And that's where I love to do that. Fast forward a few years later, I ended up moving back to the North Texas area. And after I did that, I was laid off from a job from SMU. And I'd been at SMU for years. And when I got laid off, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I was cooking all the time still. And someone had suggested I start doing cooking classes. And I was like, I didn't go to culinary school. I can't, what am I going to do cooking classes for? But the truth is I had learned an awful lot about cooking. I read a lot about it just for my own kind of edification. And then after that, I thought, you know what the heck? So I started hosting these like cooking dinner parties, I guess you would say, teaching people that way. And then shortly after that, I created a portfolio of some really nice photos of food, took them to Williams-Sonoma and like pitched myself and they hired me on the spot and I started cooking classes.
Oh, wow.
So when I started those cooking classes, I was so, I wouldn't say embarrassed, but I knew that I didn't have the culinary school background. And I was nervous about that because here I am teaching people. And I thought, what am I going to do if they ask me a question and I don't know? So that's when I began reading everything I could get my hands on about food, which is what prompted my desire to learn about food history. And so once I started doing the cooking classes, I really tried to overcompensate from my lack of a foundation from culinary arts school. And I just read everything I could get my hands on. And that's where, again, the love of food history came from.
Gotcha. You know, a lot of times, you know, you hear people say, you know, when you're chasing your passion, sometimes, you know, there's a lot of setbacks, a lot of failures, a lot of disappointments.
Absolutely.
You know, were you an anomaly and it was all just went exactly how you planned?
I wish. No, I had a lot of twists and turns and curveballs thrown my way, just like everybody else. And along the way, it just started to feel really natural. So even with my losing different jobs and like kind of pulling myself up, and figuring out what it was I wanted to do. I have a bus tour, as you mentioned. So the tour is called Soul of DFW.
We'll get into that.
Oh, okay. And so with the tour, even I had to like literally beg people to get on the tours in the beginning because I had a vision for it, but it wasn't necessarily catching on at the moment. I thought it would be a setback, but I kept after it, and eventually it caught on.
You know, is it fair to say, you know, like the passion for cooking and like the cultural history is kind of like an artist?
Yeah.
And so, and where I'm going with that is, you know, when you hear the term starving artist, it's not necessarily, you know, there's a component of because you can't find work, but also the work that you want isn't necessarily. Did you ever experience like, you know, just not being able to be connected with where your place of employment was because it wasn't your passion?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think a number of times I can probably pinpoint that. I felt like it was my passion at the moment, but very quickly after I realized, you know, whoa, I'm not a good fit for this because my heart is somewhere else. And so I think I probably have experienced that maybe even more so than a lot of people. But once you find your passion and you get out there and you start to live it, it's absolutely the greatest feeling in the world. So I just wish I could bottle this up and give it to everybody. But it's funny you should say that about labeling yourself as an artist, or, you know, people labeling themselves as artists when they're in fields like this. That's usually what I tell people, to kind of tie it up and give it like a kind of tight name and something that's easy to remember. I usually tell people I feel like I'm an artist, a creator, because I have my hand in so many things. And again, it makes sense to me because I have one mission, one purpose, but because I have so many different services and so many different avenues that I use to funnel all that energy through, I realize sometimes I'm probably an artist at the heart.
No, I would wholeheartedly think it's an art because, you know, the creativity or just the creations, whether it's, you know, your bus tour or we're going to talk a little bit about the collard greens and stuff. And we're going to talk about that. But it's truly an art. And I'm always jealous because I'm not an artist at all. You know, I say I'm more of a visionary, but I'm not, you know, I can't do all the artistic things, if you will. But, you know, let's talk a little bit about your bus tour. How did that come about?
Oh, so I mentioned I love travel. I was traveling at the end of 2017. And honestly, I had just come off the heels of an event that I had produced. It was a brunch festival. So talk about bombs. That one was not a hit because at the time people were not really celebrating brunch culture like they do now.
In Texas, but if you go to DC.
Then they were, definitely. But here in North Texas, I wanted to do something to celebrate it because I did see like this rise in everybody talking about brunch. So anyway, long story short, I did that. Was not very successful. And so I really took some time to think, one, I need to go on a vacation, clear my head, because it was near the end of the year. And that's normally when I travel. And so before I did that, I was very, very intentional about knowing that I wanted to live my passion and knowing that I love brunch, I love food, but I don't think that was really the event for me. And so I really wanted to take a moment to kind of figure out what type of event would be me on a plate, so to speak. So I went on vacation this particular time, I couldn't decide if I wanted to do a history tour or a food tour, because I always do some kind of tour when I go to different places. And I don't remember where I was, but I couldn't make up my mind. And so I thought, man, that's a good idea. Maybe there are other people like me who love food, but they also love history. And, the two are so related, which is why I call my tours cultural immersion tours, because while we focus on food and history, at some point I may incorporate art or music or different things like that. So really that was like the beginning of the idea. I came back in January 2018, and I just started planning it. And then I started the tours at the end of January, and here we are today. Yeah.
I would be remiss if I don't give you opportunity to plug the title of your tour and how people can sign up and get registered.
Thank you.
So make sure you look in that camera and you
Okay.
give them all that information.
So you can find our tours at soulofdfw.com. And we are not touring as frequently as I used to, because I'm now a Ph.D. student. And so that's taking the majority of my focus away from my baby, which is the bus tour. But we do have a couple of more tours coming up towards the end of the year. A Fort Worth Black cowboy culture tour that I'm excited about. Hopefully you can join me, you and Jordan. And then also a Caribbean history tour that I loved. It was a smash last year. So I'm hoping to do that again.
Gotcha. Well, in addition to the tour and, the culture, you're also an author.
Yeah. Yes, I am. I should have brought you a copy. I'll send it. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to hold you to it.
Yeah.
Andrew, you're listening.
Yeah.
Make sure we get the copy. A signed copy.
A signed copy, of course.
So tell me a little bit, well, first, the title of the book for our audience, but how did that come about?
It's called Cornbread and Collard Greens, How West African Cuisine and Slavery Influenced Soul Food. And I loved writing this book. It actually came about because I was completing my master's degree at SMU, and I had this thesis laying around that honestly I hadn't done anything with. I had a friend of mine call me up, and he said, "Hey, I'm trying to get into food photography. I know you cook a lot. Do you want me to shoot some pictures and stuff for you?" And that's how it came about. I didn't want him to just be shooting pictures, and I didn't have anywhere to put them. And so I thought, what if I use this thesis that I had written about a really elementary beginning version of soul food history? What if I take this paper and marry it with his photos and his images and kind of tell the history and through stories, not only through researched stories, but also through my family history. So I have a combination of familial history in there, nice anecdotes from my family. Like, my family is a trip. They are super funny. And so I share stories about growing up in Sherman with my mom, also my dad and his background. My father's from Japan, from Kobe, Japan. And so I have a little bit of influences from not only my background, but I've traveled to Japan a few times. And so I like to incorporate some recipes in there that are kind of both of those together. And then at the end of the day, I hope people walk away after reading the book with feeling like they're knowing a little bit more about soul food.
So what does soul food mean to you? Because, people say soul food, oh, that's just high blood pressure food, or that's slave food, or that's country food. But at its core, you've done the research.
Yeah.
What is soul food?
So at its core, soul food is a food that was created at the hands of enslaved Black people. And so they did this by using not only the resources they had available to them. So sure, some of them may have been rationed, what people like to call scraps. Some of them were also foods that they were growing, So back in the day, people ate a lot more, not just enslaved people, but people in general ate a lot more seasonal foods. There was no refrigeration at the time. And so you really had to cook and prepare what was from the land. And then in the cases of enslaved people, they took the foods that they had available to them, and they created these really beautiful meals that sometimes were inspired or kind of borrowed from other cultures. But at the heart of it, the majority of those men and women who were cooking in those kitchens at the time. That was a service that would have been performed by enslaved Black people. And so it's something that they created. The term, however, of like soul food did not come into play until the 60s and the 70s with the rise of soul music, you know, this kind of labeling of soul, using that as a identifier. And so that's when people began calling those foods that were commonly prepared in the South soul food. And then through the Great Migration, they began spreading to all these different parts of the country. You know, obviously, we know that soul food itself is prepared today by a number of people, but that's how it's got its origins.
Yeah, for the listeners and viewers out there, this is your history lesson on soul food. It's not just something, but there's stories behind everything.
Definitely. And I also share that it's different from Southern food. And so the two are often kind of said that they're the same thing, but they're different. They can sometimes overlap. So, for example, with Southern food, let's just say here in Texas, we have a huge background of Mexican influences, of German influences, German and Czech influences in Texas. And so I always like to say a lot of our Southern foods, like chicken fried steak, which I love, is one of my favorite foods ever. That's like a German influence, you know, but it's a Southern food. It's not a soul food. And so I usually like to point out the differences, which I always write about also in my column with the Fort Worth Report.
So talk a little bit, you know, I'll go ahead and give you that plug, the Fort Worth, because you have your hands in so many different things.
Yeah.
And so how did that come about?
Oh, wow. So I met with Chris Cobbler, and by way of a really amazing writer who I respect. Her name is Laura, and she's really phenomenal. She introduced me to Chris Cobbler, who is over the Fort Worth Report. We met, and he asked me if I'd like to do something in the field of writing for the paper. At that time, they didn't have anyone who was designated to just write about food. And I jumped at it. I thought it would be an excellent opportunity. So I have a contract position with them, a freelance, I should say, position. And I have a weekly column that's called The Dish with Deah. And I write about all things food. So sometimes I do reviews. Sometimes I write about food recipes. And then I always usually try to include something about history, since that's my brand.
If you ever need an extension, because I always hear that food critics get free food.
Yeah.
If you need, you know, an intern or, you know, or something like, let me know. You know,
I will
love
keep that
food.
in mind. But I actually don't usually accept a lot of free invitations, and that's because then I feel obligated to like give a review. And I don't give reviews on everyone. I only give reviews about the places that I've enjoyed. And like sometimes, I'll be honest with you, I don't enjoy everything.
Right.
And so when I do, I don't want to be rude, because I know that's something that's very subjective. Taste is, you know, what I like, you might not like, and vice versa. So I normally just don't talk about those things at all. I only give props to those who I feel like are just really killing it. So
that's fair. It's like, you know, we talked a lot about, you know, your culture and your love for food, but where did the writing come into? I know you're author, and now you have the weekly article, but like, where did that come into the mix?
I've always been a writer. Like, even I can remember being probably 6 or 7, and or maybe even younger than that. And my mom had created this journal for me because she saw that I loved to write. I started writing at a very young, like unusually young age. I think I was about 3. And I loved to like scribble and write. And I don't know if anybody understood me, but I loved to write. But she really encouraged me to do more writing. And so when I was really young, she created this, I'll never forget, this wire-bound kind of book for me. And she inscribed it on the inside. And she said, write a bestseller one day. And I would just write my heart out. And so, yeah, I've always loved writing. I started off writing poetry a lot, and then from there it kind of grew. Now my father, if you ask him, he'll say it comes from him because he loves to write. Now I haven't read any of these short stories he talks about, but I'll give him his props.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. You know, sometimes people take offense if you say they're a jack of all trades, but you know, you wear many hats and you have many talents. If you met me and you heard everything that I do, this is the one thing that I want you to take away from that. What would that thing be?
Oh my God, that's so hard. I don't get offended by Jack or Jill of all trades like some people do. I get offended by hustler, because to me that has a negative connotation. When I think of hustler, I think of someone who's just like not really putting a lot of thought or intention towards what they want to do.
It's an insult to the craft and time that you put into
I put a lot into that. And I know you didn't say that, but I know some people say that. But Jill of all trade or Jack of all trade, I'm good with that. I would probably, gosh, that's really hard. I would say historian. I would want to be known as someone who is a thoughtful, critical, well-researched historian.
Well, I'm going to put you on the spot since you said historian. And I didn't know you were going to say historian, full disclosure. I would love for you to share with myself and our audience, what is something that is historical to our region, either Fort Worth or Dallas, that most people just don't know about?
Oh, wow. So I often talk about, not only on my tours, but also when I do public speaking, I speak frequently about the freedmen towns that were once a thriving part of Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And so I would just say that those freedmen towns, for those who are not familiar, are these communities, these pockets of communities that were created by or founded, I should say, by formerly enslaved Black people. And so they did this because, you know, communal living was encouraged, but also they had to do it at the time because, you know, for a lot of different reasons. But there were 33 in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which a lot of people are not familiar with. And so Freedom Colonies is a name that it became known as, specifically in Texas. And there were quite a few. Now, in Texas in general, there were over 300 of these freedmen towns. And so today, even though the majority of them were started around after emancipation, so let's say late 1860s through around 1930 or so, a great deal of them no longer exist, but some of them do.
That's good. That's good. I'm going to give you my own quick history. Are you familiar with the Douglas community in East Plano?
No, I'm not.
So the Douglas community in East Plano, if you're going 75, there's there's a Home Depot on the right-hand side. Behind it, it's called Douglas Community. It's in Plano East. My great-grandfather, Moose Stimpson, was the first free slave in Collin County, and he settled in what's now known as the Douglas community. In East Plano, there's a park called the Stimpson Drake Park that they dedicated to our family because of my great-great-grandfather being the first free slave to settle in Collin County.
That's amazing. You're a celebrity, Ty.
No.
That's amazing. I did not know that.
There's a book and everything about it, so...
That's amazing. We can swap books then. I'm definitely going to get that book so I can learn more about it, especially with it being so close to Sherman. So that's amazing. Yeah.
But, you know, I'm not a historian, but that's my little part of history that I know.
That counts. Yeah.
And so, you know, and I don't know if it's to giving away, you know, all your secrets or anything like that, but I see that you're writing a new book. Low and Slow or Slow?
Oh, no. So that was another article that I had done, and it was tracing the history of barbecue, which I love to talk about. I don't consider myself the authority figure on barbecue because I feel like barbecue, again, is just like every week, I feel like my mind is being blown because I'm finding out something new. But that being said, I did really enjoy writing this article for Local Profile Magazine, which is in Plano and North Texas, kind of the Collin County community. So I had fun writing that. So yeah, it's called Low and Slow is the name of the article. And about the history of Texas barbecue.
True story.
Mm-hmm.
I smoked a brisket on 4th of July.
Okay.
And I'm kind of rusty. It's been a minute.
Yeah.
And I always text my former investigator. Shout out Mark Taylor. I hope you watch this so you can hear. So we always go back and forth. And he smokes his brisket at 250, 265.
Okay.
I'm a 225 guy. And I know it takes longer, but you're the expert. You're the expert.
So whatever Ty says, we're going to go with that because he's going to make me look good on camera.
You see, Mark, yeah. I'm right.
So Ty is right, Mark. Yeah.
So, and so now you're doing a PhD. How did this come about?
Oh, wow. So I wanted to learn as much as I could about history. And I wanted to be considered an authority figure. And so in order to do that, I thought I'm going to need to really devote myself to this craft in any way possible. And so I had heard a lot about, I love food history, but I always tell people, although I came through studying history by kind of at first focusing on food history, I saw very soon after that you can't study food history without studying what was going on around it. And so that's when I wanted to open it up and study all about history. And so I heard about this magnificent program by way of University of North Texas, and I applied. And funny story, I applied last January. I never heard anything back, and I thought, well, that's embarrassing. I guess I didn't get in, but they didn't even send me a letter to tell me I didn't even get in. And so I kind of went on about my business. And there was probably around August, I think, I was getting ready to go to Galveston on a little quick weekend getaway. And I called in because I thought, you know what? I keep seeing this program and I never heard anything back. Let me just call and see why I didn't get in. And maybe it's something I can work on or just keep applying to. And so, because I never take no for an answer. Right. And so that's what I did. I called and they were like, oh, basically, long story short, they had lost my application. And so I had gotten in after they reviewed everything. And they said, yeah, you're definitely in. Can you start the next, this fall? Which was like 2 weeks away. And I was like, oh my God. So at the time I had already, I had gotten a job working for Dallas Historical Society, which was, they're housed inside of a museum over in Dallas at Fair Park. And that was intentional on my part also. I got a job working for the museum because I wanted to be around history all day and get paid for it. And so luckily, I quit that job back in February so that I could devote my time to the tours and writing and really just lean into my craft. And so it just so happens it was the right time, right place. I had the time available to be a PhD student. You have to go full time. And I was able to do that and also gain a teaching fellowship to kind of help support myself. So that with the writing and the tours, that's how I make my living now. I love it. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's good. You have a lot of great things that you're doing and a lot of interesting things as well.
Thanks.
40 years from now, when you have this big retirement party, you are now the host of Top Chef. How do you want to be remembered?
Oh, wow. I want people to say I added a lot of thoughtful and lively discussions to the table when it comes to not only food, but history in general. I want them to know that I was a preserver of Black cultural history and Texas cultural history. I'm a proud Texan. I'm always saying that in everything, every chance I get. 5th generation Texan is something I'm really proud of. And also my Southern heritage. So I just want people to remember that I did everything that I could in order to preserve those cultures and also to educate.
That's good. That's good. Well, Deah, thank you again for sitting down and having this conversation with me. It was truly, inspiring, but also now I'm hungry. But thank you again.
You're so welcome. I had a great time. I had fun.
Thanks for watching. You can find us anywhere where you find your podcast.